happened that the guy was being shady. It seems suspicious, and he can go take a long walk off a short pier. It turns out it was an issue for the guy trying to sell those combined lots. I promised you a story. It's a long one, and it's going to be in several parts. I promised you the story of the land. I have always been somebody who loves to be on the water. My dad has always had waterfront property, and so my kids have all these awesome memories of doing all these activities on the water. And I would really like that experience for my grandchildren as well. Not to mention that I love being in the water. I am a big paddleboarder, kayaker. I was on swim team in high school. I've always loved the ocean. I can scuba, I can snorkel. It's just not practical for us to live on the water right now. The plan is to retire and have a lake house because we don't think that our original plan of living on the coast is the best course of action. We don't want to deal with the tourists, the hurricanes, the insurance, the flooding, things like that. So as of now, the plan is to buy a lake house. So for the past several years, we've been saving up to make this happen eventually. There's a lake nearby that I visited a lot when I was a kid, and especially when we would come down from Ohio to visit my grandparents. Over the years, I've been watching the foreclosure market because it's gotten to be highly desirable, and the costs on that lake are astronomical now. So when a foreclosure came up in 2024, I jumped at the chance. Unfortunately, we did not have the money to buy the property. So we talked about going in on it with a family member. Long story short, that would have been a disaster. And in the end, the house needed far too much work, more than we were capable of doing or affording, and we let it go. That really lit a fire under me about starting the whole process. We don't really have that many years until we retire, and if we start working on it now, the train of thought being that if we start the process now, we can take our time and do it slowly instead of doing it all at once and it probably costing a lot more at that point. After that property fell through, I started looking at other properties. And there was a few really neat ones on that lake, just a lot further out. There was one that overlooked a now defunct nuclear plant, and we had the great idea that we would build an Airbnb that was all Fallout themed. The drive out there was just absolutely miserable. The lot needed a lot of work, and I'm not exactly sure how navigable that water was going to be. So I started looking at a different lake in the opposite direction, about the same distance. I don't think it's near as popular as First Lake. I think its time is coming. I think it's coming soon. And if we buy something now, it'll be a lot more affordable than waiting and buying something 10 years from now. We're going to refer to my husband as Jay because that's his first initial. And he and his job, he works 4 10s. So he works Monday through Thursday and has every Friday off. So we began the process of spending our Fridays looking at properties on this other lake. This lake is very spread out. It is in 3 counties. The roads around it are terrible. And if you go look at properties, you're only looking at a handful. You might get to see 5 of them. The guy that would eventually do our land clearing tells a story of he had 2 properties that you could see them across the water. If you took a boat, it took 5 minutes to get across. If you took roads, it took an hour to get from property to property. That's how spread out this is. We had not really decided whether or not we were going to get just land, a lot in a subdivision, or property that actually had a dwelling on it. And I say dwelling because there are a lot of tiny homes and cabins and manufactured homes all over this lake. I had a realtor. He is amazing. But unfortunately, this was not his area of expertise. So he was fine with me doing the information digging. And when I actually needed the official MLS listing or I needed to go walk a home or things like that, he was more than happy to facilitate that. So I created the spreadsheet, of course, that cross-referenced the MLS listing with the Zillow listing, the Trulia listing, and the Redfin listing, its location on Google Maps and Google Earth, the GIS data, and the property tax information. and then, of course, a place for notes. And when my realtor saw this spreadsheet, he actually asked if he could steal it and use it in his office. And I'm pretty sure they're still using my spreadsheet in his office. And in retrospect, I probably should have charged him. We did get to walk a couple houses. One of them was a great deal on a manufactured home. And when we actually went to go see it, it was about to fall into the lake. I really wish I had a marble or something in my purse just to see how badly this place was leaning. And when I saw how it was being supported on the side of the hill, I immediately left the house. I do know that several months later it was still for sale, and I'm not quite sure if it ever did sell. There was a cute little red house that was nearly perfect. It had a lot going for it. But for some reason, since it didn't sell quickly, there was a renter living there, and the whole thing was just questionable. We refer to this one as the Chokey House, named after the movie Matilda, because there was a storage shed outside and it was completely empty except for a child's chair, and there was a padlock on the outside of the door. I am assuming the kid was using it as a playhouse, but we just can't be adults about it. There was one house that was absolutely perfect. I loved it. It wasn't that far out. It was easy to get to, but it was a mobile home, manufactured home, straight out of 1986, and it was small. I don't know if it was more than 800 square feet, but it had a dock, it had a porch. It just needed a little bit of love, and I think it could have been something really cute until we decided to build something bigger, better, what have you. It was a two-bedroom, so the kids would have been crammed in the other room, but I think we definitely could have made it work. The downsides to it was that it had a very long driveway, and the left side of the property facing the water adjoined a recovery house for veterans, which I didn't think was too big a deal, but I could see where there could be potential problems later. But I really don't think it would have been an issue. And to be fair, the property on the other side was a very nice manufactured home, and then across the water, multi-million dollar houses. Just think that I think that would have been a really good investment. There was another one that I went and looked at just with the realtor because my husband couldn't join us that day. And it was a neat property. It was run of the mill, double wide manufactured home, very nice shape, huge porch all the way around it, very well landscaped. But the neat thing about it was it sat on top of a cave. So when you came off the back porch and went down the stairs, there was a overhang area and there was a fire pit and chairs around it. And that night it had frozen, so there was like icicles hanging from the ceiling of the cave. It was adorable. It was not on the best water. It looked like it was somewhat seasonal. However, one of the things that we had been doing was we started looking in August of 2024, and we had been having a massive drought. So the water levels were already low. And this particular lake is dammed. So it does not have high water all year. I believe full pool is only May to September. The rest of the time, it is very easy to get partial water or no water at all during the winter months. So we knew that if we started looking in August with this drought, if it still had water September, October with the drought plus low pool, we were probably in really good shape. It was so bad that year that one of the marinas was completely dry and you could not get boats in and out. This place having a little bit of water was not that big of a concern to me because I felt that if it had any water at all, it was probably fine. When I pulled up the property tax information, it was weird because their garage looked like it sat over the property line and well onto the neighbor's property. And the way they had it set up made no sense compared to how it was recorded with county. Now, this area is well known for the property tax maps being wrong. You have to go pull plats. A lot of the times you can pull the probate records and get a ballpark, but things like having a survey are almost always necessary. Before I made an offer, I wanted more information. So my realtor contacted the people who owned it, and the guy came back and said that they had done a special deal with the neighbors and had the property lines redrawn, and they had all the legal documentation and paperwork. And he would be happy to give that to me after I made an offer, which is the dumbest thing because I could have made an offer and made it contingent on a survey or getting that documentation. I don't know why he was going to die on that hill. We were out of town for Thanksgiving that week, and I told my realtor that that was not going to happen. And his realtor came back and asked if we had any, and so we declined to make an offer. His realtor came back and asked for feedback as to why we did not make an offer. And I told my realtor to go back and tell them exactly what happened, that the guy was being shady. It seems suspicious, and he can go take a long walk off a short pier. My realtor asked if I wanted to give that exact feedback, and I said yes. I can't be the only one who doesn't want to put an offer on the property where large chunks of the outbuildings are on somebody else's property. I never heard back what happened, but I'd be really interested to hear. I do know that it took about 9 months to sell. I don't know what happened with that. I have no way of looking it up right now, but the whole thing was just bizarre. Bulk of our searching was just plots of land. Some were in subdivisions and had things like utilities and things like that ran to it. Other ones were just raw land. And we knew that anything that was just raw land we would have to put a lot of money into to improve it. Since you don't have to have a realtor to show you a plot of land, we could do a lot of this on our own without bothering the wonderful realtor. Some of the notable ones were the one where you turned by the farm with the furry cows. That was probably first on my list. The lot was absolutely terrible, but to say turn by the furry cows was a definite plus in my book. There was one in a neighborhood that we really, really liked, and it was just under an acre. So it wasn't a huge plot of land, but it wasn't small either. And in that county, they've changed the rules to where if you have to have septic, you have to have an acre, or you have to have a specialized system that's really expensive. So we were going back and forth about that one. And while we were trying to make the decision, it sold. So we did not get that one. There was one that was in a place called Paradise Point. It was a very small subdivision. It did have an HOA, but it was probably one of the most chill HOAs I had ever seen. I had pulled where they had made changes to the original bylaws and stuff, and I think it was maybe 10 houses. And they just seemed like a really good group of people. And there was actually a few Airbnbs on that peninsula. So if we did decide to build something or buy something to put on it, if we wanted to rent it out when we weren't there, that was definitely an option. And really, we were trying to keep our options open because if we could generate income with it, we could afford a little bit more. The problem with this one was when you looked it up on Google Earth, there were several instances where the two lots on either side of it were completely fine, but when the water levels were super high or it was like flood years, that particular lot flooded nearly to the road. And my suspicion is the reason why that one was so affordable was because you would have had to build it up on stilts or have some really serious flood insurance. There was another one that was a little far out, but it seemed like a really great deal. And it had been on the market for a while, so I felt maybe we could negotiate on it. And let me tell you, The drive out there was almost terrifying. It takes a lot for me to get uncomfortable with an area, but this was obviously where the land was divided among kids or grandkids or something, and they were all family members that owned all the adjacent lots. And when you looked up the property information, the person who owned this lot that was for sale had the same last name as everybody else, but they lived in Michigan. And my guess is they did not jive with this particular side of the family and were trying to unload this property. And when we drove out there, the other people who owned the adjacent lots came out and watched us drive down the road and get out and look at the land. There were dogs everywhere. They were in the road. I was terrified we were going to hit them. And I told my husband, I said, we are not buying this. This would be a nightmare. This would be uncomfortable. So we did not buy that one. There was another one that was a very good deal. It was definitely a fixer-upper, but it was nothing we couldn't handle. The biggest problem with it is that the bathrooms were straight out of the 80s and needed were in great need of a overhaul. But we've done that before. It's not a big deal. We could definitely swing it. Had a great outside area. The problem was the view, it was on a very narrow inlet, and the view across the water was not great because people across the water decided to decorate their entire two-story dock with every political affiliation they ever considered having, which just kills the view. It's like, oh, look, you have this very nice lake, and you look, and it's like all the posters, flags, and propaganda that it was enough to where it was weird. The other problem with that one was it was a nearly vertical drop to the water, and it was a staircase straight down. And I just had this whole vision in my head of me wearing my paddleboard backpack down the stairs and falling down, or trying to get back up and like tipping over backwards. The thing is that one was so affordable, and we really could have done a lot with it. And I'm sure the neighbors would have been fine. It was just a lot. The property we ended up with was one of the first properties that we saw. It was a bigger parcel out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, but everything on this lake is in the middle of nowhere. It was on the other side of the lake than we really wanted to be. We wanted to be on the side near the interstate for convenience. But the land was beautiful, but oh boy, did it need a lot of work. The reason we overlooked it was because it was down this dirt road that had not been maintained in forever. You can tell at one point it did have pavement, but it had been a very long time. And with the drought, if you drove down it, it kicked up the biggest cloud of dirt you have ever seen. It was so overgrown, it was actually hard to see the water. And I just felt it was just too much. After we had been looking for, I think, the fourth month or so, the lots next to it went up for sale. And whoever their realtor was did amazing pictures, got out in a kayak and kayaked up water and took a lot of the pictures of the lot from the water. Now, I happen to know that that lot, or it's a bunch of smaller lots wedged together owned by one guy, so they were selling it as one, was nearly vertical. You were not allowed to build a house on it, and there was no way you could install septic because it was nearly all rock. But the pictures the realtor took were amazing, and it was enough for me to go back and take a second look at the one we ended up buying. And it had rained since the last time we had been out there, so the second time we went out there, the road wasn't nearly as dusty and horrible. Now, mind you, the road is horrible. It will always be horrible. But there are some really nice houses down at the end of the point that this one's on. So I'm hoping that maybe somebody important lives down there and one day they will pay for the road. We ended up making an offer on the property in late January of 2025 with the conditions that it had to pass perk. We had to get a survey because I did not trust where the lines were on the property tax map. And we had to be able to get power and water to it. It did end up passing all three of those. We did get a survey, which there's more to that story later. And I have to say, the survey was probably the best money we have ever spent. The neat thing about this lake is there is a tree, and I believe it's called a cucumber magnolia, but because Alabama, it's called a cowcumber by Alabamians. And it's a fairly rare tree in the United States and really only exists in this narrow band across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And I had never seen a tree like this before, and the leaves are massive. I've easily seen the leaves be 2.5 feet. And when I first saw them, we had visited a lot that was near a bridge, and it was the noisiest lot I have ever heard. You could hear every car as it went over the bridge. And it was down the road a bit from the bridge. And I guess the water carried the sound, but it was fall at this point because I think it was late November. And when you walked across, all you saw was like this carpet of these dried up, massive leaves. And so kind of fell in love with them because they were so neat. And I looked them up, and when they bloom, the leaves, are green and normal and beautiful. But since it's a magnolia, it gets these big blooms on it in the spring and summer. And they're like the head of a cabbage. They are neat. Um, so the lot that we ended up buying was absolutely covered in these trees, and I absolutely love them. When we had some site work done, that was my only thing, was he could not cut down these magnolia trees. I think we ended up losing one of them because our land guy is just the best, and he understood exactly why I thought they were so cool. And I think I got a little bit street cred with him because he's a local to the area, and my insistence that the really neat trees had to stay and I didn't want anything clear cut, I think he really respected that. Another great part about the property we bought was the fact that there are no neighbors across the water. I'm sure one day we will have neighbors to our left and to our right, but the land directly across from us is not only floodplain, but also owned by the federal government. So I'm hoping that the view will always be awesome. And it being a wider lot, we can see down, it's kind of in the bend in the water. And the lot is a wide lot on a narrow part of the lake. So it looks down water both directions around the curve. And then you have the just forest across from us. So hopefully it will always be an amazing view and we can look out onto the nature of it all. One of the complications with this lot was I'm fairly certain it was a divorce sale because on the ownership paperwork, it was what looked like a husband and wife and their adult daughter. And it took forever for them to get back to us after we made the offer. I think the mother and the daughter lived somewhat locally, and then the husband or former husband lived in a different state or several hours away, and they had to get him to sign off on the offer as well. This had also been on the market for a year, a little over a year at this point, and it had just been marketed horribly. Whoever did their listing had put no effort into it. And I'm under the impression for them to finalize the divorce, this land had to sell. So we came in, it wasn't a lowball offer, but we came in under asking, and and asked them to pay all the fees and stuff. And then, of course, we had the three contingencies on there. After we got, they were very amenable to all that. We never did meet them. They did a closing in one city, we did a closing in another. And I think they were just happy to kind of not have to deal with it anymore. One important thing about the survey was it turns out that the property is actually 90 feet to the right if you're facing the water, which means it's an entire lot over because there's a small, skinny driveway to another lot in between. So where we thought we had a power pole at the corner of the property and things like that, we do not have. And also the property gets steeper the further to the right you get. So it changed where we were going to do things like put the driveway. But we had enough space because it's a wider lot that it wasn't going to be an issue. But it turns out it was an issue for the guy trying to sell those combined lots to the right. We ended up getting a phone call in June of 2025 from the realtor that had the amazing listing for that property next to us. We had our property markers out from where our survey had been done. And he calls and says that we are on his client's property. Now, the client actually owns a good chunk of property in that area. So this guy's technically our neighbor, and I didn't want to be rude about it. But I told the realtor, I said, we had this surveyed. It's correct. It's cross-referenced with several monuments that we know are correct. Those three properties are all shifted 90 feet to the right. And he wanted to fight about it. After I had called my realtor and the guy who did the survey, we all agreed that he may have just been trying to not have to get his own survey, but in the interest of peace and being nice to the neighbor who actually owned it and owned the properties on the other side, that we would give them our survey. And I sent it to him, complete with the plat of the area that was filed with the county, and said, if you had any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to discuss this with you. Things like that. And I even told him when I talked to him on the phone that I loved his listing. I just knew that those lots were not ideal. And I'm assuming we were correct because he kind of hinted at, we might have to get legal involved. And I was like, okay, if we have to get legal involved, we will. But I don't think I'm incorrect. The fact that I never heard from him again makes me think we were correct, and he had to tuck his tail between his legs and go back to his client and go, well. So I'm hoping nothing ever comes back up from that. Fingers crossed. So that's the story of how the whole saga begins. There's definitely much more to the story, and I can't say that the purchasing process was difficult or overly taxing or things like that. And to be fair, we did spend 7 months looking at properties by the time it was all said and done. The whole thing started in June of 2024, and we made the offer at the end of January 2025, and we did not close until the end of February 2025. So this was something we were methodical about, probably a little impulsive about. Uh, the spreadsheet was massive, like they always are, and I ended up getting really decent financing on it at a not horrible rate for the market at the time. We ended up paying zero closing costs. We didn't have to get it appraised, and the interest rate was not the worst it could have been. So if you're interested in hearing how it all goes downhill from there and turns into the biggest dumpster fire you have ever seen, like and subscribe. Follow along with me. See where this goes. Maybe I was lulled into a false sense of security by how smooth things seemed to be at the time. Until next time.